In this narrated PowerPoint lecture, we're taking a look at ethics, decision-making, and the law. We're just going to have simply an overview of how ethics and decision-making and law are all interrelated. And the readings that correspond with this narrated lecture give you that broad overview. We're concerned about making sure that everyone can make a connection between values, morality, ethics, and law. How are those topics related? You need to understand the major ethical systems and or theories that are in place. You need to consider the sources of business ethics. We need to think about how individuals evaluate a decision from an ethical perspective. And then consider how can a business or an organization promote ethical decision making. First off, let's think about the connection between values, morality, ethics, and the law. On the slide you see all four of these terms, and they're laid out in a circle with arrows showing connections. And that is true, they are connected, they do influence each other. However, each is separate and distinct in its own right. Let's start with values. Values are enduring beliefs about what is right or wrong or what an outcome should be. Each of us has a built-in set of values, things that we believe to the core, things that we think are right and wrong. Those are values. Morality is when we take those values and we apply them to a decision and it guides our behavior. Morality are values that guide your behavior. We each individually have our own values, set of values, our own moral compass, if you will, when we apply those values. Groups, organizations, businesses have their own value system in place. You think about a group, it's made up of individuals, so those individuals' values all come to the table. So recognize the connection between values and morality. Then think about ethics. Ethics is the formal decision-making system that we use to guide us whenever we're confronted with what to do or not do. It's a formal system for deciding what is right and wrong and how we justify our decisions. Ethics and ethical decision-making is going to be rooted in our values. When we put those values together and use them as a guide for behavior, that's morality. And that morality and those underlying values guide us in our ethical decision-making. Now, it might seem that law has nothing to do with ethics and values and morality. Law, after all, as we've studied, is any rule or set of rules that are enforceable. Do not speed. Do not commit insider trading. Things like that. Those are all laws that are enforceable. Do not discriminate. Well, laws do not occur in a vacuum. Many laws are rooted in societal values. And when you put all those values together, the moral views of society based on these enduring beliefs, and those can guide what is actually in the law. Our ethical views of what is right or wrong might guide what is actually in the law. So ethical values, ethics and values and law all have complementary purposes. They all deal with what is right or wrong. Ethical values, they're not enforced by the state, but what laws are enforced by the government. So you can think about law as that minimum standard of behavior that as a society we're willing to accept. It's that lowest behavior we're willing to accept. And laws hopefully are rooted in the values of society on the whole, the morality of society, whereas ethics can be something quite different than what that minimum standard of behavior is. Ethics might be much higher, much higher. But perhaps we as a group can't agree on what the standard of behavior should be at this higher level. So the law steps in to provide that minimal standard of behavior. Often ethical norms will support what the law says, but law and ethics are separate and distinct areas. However, recognize it can influence what the law is, and think about how law is rooted in societal values at any moment in time. So when we think about values, morality, ethics, and law, they're not in isolation. They're related topics. Some of them do feed on each other. And you can think about, if we have certain laws in place about what we expect, law over time might change how society views certain issues. Law might actually help shape what individual values are and what the overall morality is in a particular area. And so it's important to consider and think about how law is influenced by values and morality and ethical norms. It's not just in isolation. We need to be familiar with the major ethical theories that are at play, and your reading materials do a good job of laying out the major ethical systems. You can see there's really two major ethical theories, or two categories of them: consequentialism and then what I call non-consequentialism. Consequentialism is very different than non-consequentialism. So I want to first talk about non-consequentialism. This view of ethics, this framework of making ethical decisions, is a rules-based approach. It applies absolute morality. Certain things are considered right, certain things are considered wrong. Lying is wrong, therefore there's no justification for it. This is a type of non-consequentialism. It's rules-based. Some things are right, some things are wrong. You violate the rule, you violate this ethical framework. Formalism, as you see, is a type of non-consequentialism. And you can think about it. Ask yourself, what would happen if everyone made the same decision as you? If you ask that question, what would happen if everyone made the same decision as you? That can guide you in this rule-based approach as a way of thinking about what you should or shouldn't do. So with deontology and formalism, they are both types of this non-consequentialist approach. We're not concerned about really the outcome. We're concerned about the actual rule. Is it being violated or not? It affirms absolute morality. You can ask about what would happen if everyone made the same decision as you, and that might guide you on whether the decision to do this is right or wrong. Virtue ethics is another type of non-consequentialism. A virtue is something that society generally accepts: honesty, loyalty, not lying, compassion. It's not the action guiding, or that provides the actual answer on how to act. Under this view, an actor weighs the virtues to guide the decision. You weigh whatever virtue you're thinking about. Are you going to hold up the virtue of honesty, the virtue of compassion, the virtue of loyalty? That's what you focus on when you're deciding to do or not do something. Not really that end result. Not really the end result. Okay, so that's what we consider non-consequentialism, rules-based. Consequentialism is the other extreme. Focuses on the outcome. It's worried about the moral consequences of our action. One variety of consequentialism is utilitarianism. Which decision would provide the greatest good for the greatest number of people? Judgment of actions based on whether they serve to increase the common good. If my decision will be good for everyone overall, fine. It's an okay decision. Greatest good for the greatest number. Maybe I'll break a few rules along the way. But if it's good for everybody in the big picture, then maybe we'll go with that. Ethical egoism. This is when individuals act in their own self-interest. I'm going to do whatever is good for me in the end. And that might justify lying or cheating or doing some things that are wrong. So these are different approaches, these two broad categories of consequentialism and non-consequentialism, of thinking about ethical dilemmas. So as you look at the materials, think about those two broad categories and the major ethical theories that fit within those two broad categories. Another thing we need to think about is, how do we go about making individual ethical decisions? And there's some things you can ask yourself. Is what I'm doing wrong? Am I proud of it? What I want everyone to know? Is it hurting anyone? Will I break the law? See that connection with the law? If you break a law, it's probably not ethical. Remember, that law is the minimum standard of behavior. So what we see here on this slide is it gives you an overview of those things to consider when you self-examine what you're doing. You consider these specific questions to guide you on whether or not something might be ethical. And then as you're doing this, you could apply a framework, an ends-based approach, or a rules-based approach, and you might come up with some different answers depending on what viewpoint you adopt. And then we need to think about, what are the sources of business ethics? It's a lot of the same things. Our individual values, enduring beliefs that you and I have, and we're part of an organization. Laws, regulations can impact what a business ethics will be. Then professional codes of conduct or organizational codes of conduct. Now, I'm a lawyer, so we have the state bar that has certain rules of conduct if you're a part of a professional group. So a whole panoply of things could impact a business's ethics and how they evaluate things. Certainly the law, individuals that are in the organization, looking outside at codes of conduct, those all might impact business ethics. And then finally, think about how can I promote in a business organization, how can a business organization promote ethical decision making? And these are not necessarily in any type of ranking. You want to involve everyone in the organization in the decision making, theoretically. Certainly top management. Have everyone have a buy-in about what we're trying to do and promote this common good. You want to have full communication among all levels of the organization. You need to consider the stakeholders. Stakeholder theory is the idea that you consider everyone impacted by your decision. Not just employees, not just customers, not just vendors, not just the bottom line. You consider everyone impacted. And that can help guide you on making a particular decision. And then you need to always recognize and reinforce that acting ethically is not necessarily inconsistent with making a profit. Profits and ethics don't necessarily contradict. An ethical organization can actually be an asset. It can help the community. It can be good for everyone on the whole. And frankly, it might lead to goodwill. If you're giving back and sharing in the community, that can actually help your organization. So there's a whole host of things to consider when you're trying to promote ethical decision making in a business. Well, as you look at the block of materials and this introduction to ethics in business, try to get a handle on the major ethical theories and make sure you understand how ethical decision making can be put into play, and think about the connection between law and ethics. They're not just in isolation. If you have any questions, please feel free to email.